The Gospel according to Luke. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was a descendant from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place in the guest room. Now, in that same region, there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." The gospel of the Lord. Well, like we did last Sunday, when we were looking at the Isaiah chapter 7 passage, there is another passage in Isaiah that is quoted in Luke and in Matthew. So I want to go back and let's look at that Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. Isaiah writes, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied exaltation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this." We're used to that being read at our Advent and Christmas Eve services. But like the passage that we read on Sunday, this is set in a historical situation. Sure, Matthew and Luke draw on the Isaiah texts, but I want us to go back and look at the text. What did it mean then to the original audience? It's the world of the 8th century BC. The historical setting is still, as we mentioned regarding Isaiah chapter 7, is still the Syro-Ephraimitic War, the crisis that was taking place when Syria and the North Kingdom, Israel, were trying to form an alliance against the great power of Assyria. Remember, Syria and Assyria are not the same place. Isaiah chapter 9, our text, belongs to that same geopolitical world. The date is 734 to 732 BC. The context is, once again, Judah is threatened by the alliance of Aram, Syria, and Israel, Ephraim. Ahaz is the king of Judah, and he is tempted to rely on Assyria, on their promises for protection. Isaiah insists that only trust in God, not in imperial alliances, is the path of survival. Our passage in verses 2 through 7 is a royal cycle, likely delivered at the coronation or even the birth of a king coming from the line of David. It's Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz. The text is celebrating the dawn of a new era after a period of darkness, a period of oppression and military threat. This is not originally a messianic prophecy about some distant future. No, it's set in the years 734, 732 BC. It's a political poem announcing hope in this immediate historical moment. The passage unfolds in three movements. There is verses 2 and 3, the change from darkness to light. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. The darkness, of course, is the political oppression, the fear, the instability that they were fearing. What was the light then? Well, it was the rise of a new king, King Hezekiah, who would be considered one of the great kings of Judah. He promises justice and stability. This is classic royal ideology. The king's accession to the throne is imagined as a cosmic renewal. It also is about liberation from oppression. That's the second movement in verses 4 and 5. There's three metaphors that are used to describe the end of foreign domination: breaking the yoke, shattering the rod, and burning the boots and blood-stained cloaks. Ending foreign rule, foreign domination. Talks about the day of Midian. Now, what in the world is the day of Midian? Well, remember, that's bringing to remembrance that very improbable, let's call it miraculous victory of Gideon in the book of Judges, Judges 6, 7, and 8, where Gideon and 300 defeated Midian, telling us that it's Yahweh, not military might, that brings deliverance. That third movement in verses 6 and 7 is the enthronement of the child. This is the heart of the oracle. A child is born. Royal titles are bestowed on him. And the Davidic throne is reaffirmed. Justice and righteousness are promised from this time forth and forevermore. That's coronation language. It's not metaphysics. It's not theology. It's the coronation and the hope that's found in this new king. Okay, so those royal titles: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Great, great, great imagery, great language. And of course, we immediately think of Handel's great work, The Messiah. And they're singing wonderful, dun, 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 counselor. The four titles in verse 6 are best understood as throne names, similar to those that were given to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian kings. Wonderful Counselor. Well, this is a king who is endowed with wisdom for governance. Think of Solomon, also of the Davidic throne, successor to David. Mighty God. This isn't a claim that the king is divine. In fact, in Hebrew, the word El Gabor can mean a godlike hero or a divinely empowered warrior. Comparable to the titles like Son of God that were used for the pharaohs of Egypt. And then eventually, the pharaohs considered themselves to not only be a son of God, but to be a God. Everlasting Father. That was a metaphor for the king as the protector and provider for the national family, for the people. Prince of Peace. A ruler whose justice brings social stability and an end to warfare. These titles represent idealized kingship. This is what we want a king to be. This is what we think a king should be. This isn't a literal deity. No, it's the king. The king will have a great king should have all of these attributes. Now, you're probably thinking ahead, as I do, that how wonderfully all of those apply to Jesus. In the same way that we talked about last week, that the passage from Isaiah chapter 7, Emmanuel, God with us, this child. Matthew and Luke take those passages and apply them to Jesus. Rightly so. Oh, what was the original meaning? Let's go back to that. The political oracle for Hezekiah, and the oracle is celebrating the coronation, maybe the birth of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was crowned king in 715 BC. Only 3 years later, the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, would fall. So during Hezekiah's time, we finally get a break from the Assyrians. And then the last standing army of the Assyrians will fall at the Battle of Carchemish in 605. Sorry, 705. The hope that he will that Hezekiah will reverse the failures of Ahaz. Ahaz, remember, he was indecisive. He was weak. He did not want to face off against the Assyrians. The hope is now that Hezekiah will do better than dear old dad. The expectation, he will bring justice. He will bring peace, bring liberation from Assyria. The poem is what we call aspirational. It describes what the king should be, not necessarily what he was. It's a prophetic vision of what a righteous kingship should look like. Now, in the later Jewish interpretations of it, in Second Temple Judaism, which remember, the first temple is the Temple of Solomon, destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 587, 586 BC. Then, after the Babylonian captivity, the people come back and the temple is rebuilt, known as the Second Temple. So Second Temple Judaism is a whole different cat than First Temple Judaism. It was the rise of rabbinic Judaism, rabbis, teachers, more than priests. And so in this Second Temple Judaism, Isaiah chapter 8 and 9 were read in a different context. After all, the monarchy has fallen. The last of the kings of Judah were gone. And now the text starts looking forward. Sure, during Hezekiah's time, they had peace. He was a good king. He was a parent to the nation. A parent to the nation, a father to the nation. He was wise. He was peaceful. A good religious leader, too. But that's past. And now they look at the Isaiah's text and they start looking forward to something else that will come. It was interpreted as a promise for a future Davidic ruler, that the line of David would be reestablished. It never was. Not in an earthly kingdom, to be sure. The royal titles were understood to be metaphors then, or as attributes of God reflected in some future king. This is where the text begins to take on overtones of Messiah. Well, when the Christians begin to reinterpret it, the early Christian community reading the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, in it they saw in this passage a child born in extraordinary circumstances, a bringer of peace, an heir of David, a ruler whose reign is forever. Oh, who does that describe for Christians? Sure, describes Jesus. Both Matthew and Luke echo Isaiah chapter 9 in their nativity stories and their narratives of the birth of Christ. But remember, this is a rereading. It's not the original meaning. The Septuagint intensifies really the divine language, and that makes the text even more resonant for the early Christians. Once again, that's not what the original meaning of the text was, but in later Jewish readings, it becomes a foretelling or a hope or a prophecy for the Messiah. For Christians, that was fulfilled in Jesus. But the passage centers on the end of oppression, the breaking of yokes, the burning of the instruments of war, and even the clothing of war. It imagines a world where justice and righteousness are the foundation of life, even political life. It criticizes imperial domination. Assyria, in its original context, later on, Rome, or any of those who followed. But it insists that peace is absolutely inseparable from justice. What's the The bumper sticker you see on the cars, on cars? No justice, no peace. But it's also a part of a larger child sign motif in Isaiah chapters 7, 8, and 9, where an unnamed woman or unnamed women bear children who symbolize divine presence and hope. The mother of the children, whether Isaiah chapter 7 or 8 or 9, the women are not mentioned. So who bears the cost of this royal ideology? Some scholars reclaim this unnamed woman as a figure of resistance, a figure of even agency, the one who literally brings the light into the world. In Christianity, we think of Mary. The early church theologians referred to Mary in this Greek phrase, Theotokos, the one who bears God. Not bears like carries, bears as in giving birth to God. We're referred to as Theophoros, those who carry God within them. Mary was referred to as Theotokos, the one who bears God. She then, for Christianity, becomes the one who brings the light to the world. There's this theological arc in Isaiah chapters 7 through 12. And Isaiah 9 is part of that, what's come to be called the Emmanuel complex. Not complex like a Freudian complex, but I mean a complex structure, literary structure. In Isaiah chapter 7, we see a child who is a sign of the divine presence. In chapter 8, we see a child whose name signals justice. Remember Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. Chapter 9 is the child whose birth signals liberation. And of course, remember, the name Jesus means liberation. Isaiah chapter 11 is a future Davidic ruler filled with the Spirit. And we're quoting Luke here today. Luke is the one who constantly reinforces the ministry of Jesus as being driven by the Spirit. Everything Jesus does is under the power of the Spirit. So together, these texts, Isaiah chapters 7 through 11, 12, it explores how fragile political hope is when you're basing that hope on empires. It talks about the tension between the immediate crisis and a long-term vision. There's the interplay between judgment and restoration, and the belief that God works through very vulnerable beings, like children. All those Isaiah passages are talking about children, that God has made manifest through those children. God's presence is symbolized by these children. How much more for us when we read that God in Jesus is dwelling among us. The Word was made flesh and lived among us. In our passage, Isaiah 9, 2 through 7, we have, in summary, a royal enthronement oracle for a historical Davidic king, Hezekiah. A poem of political hope in the face of imperial threat. A vision of justice and peace and righteous governance. a text that was later reinterpreted in messianic forms, both in Judaism and in Christian traditions, and a rich resonance that still echoes to us when we think about oppressed peoples, and that the deliverance of the oppressed, the liberation of all of those nationalities, cultural groups, the poor, women, the hope is in this divine child. This is a text where politics and poetry and theology all converge, and where later communities have found, like ours, have found new meaning in this ancient hope that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. That light comes tomorrow on Christmas morning. It comes to us every year as we celebrate something that was already done, but something that continually happens in us. We once walked in darkness. We have seen a great light. Merry Christmas.